Okay, I hope you've all, I'm Phil Reynolds, the program chair, and I hope you've all enjoyed your dinner. By popular demand, Bill Davis will answer some questions about the Sister State program. There you go.
Just the one comment that was raised, and I should have mentioned it, that besides the sister state, within this program we have sister cities. So Annapolis is tied to the capital of Estonia, Tallinn. Salisbury is tied to Tartu, and they just named the bridge in Salisbury, the Tartu Friendship Bridge. It was a big event there. Bel Air is tied to Narva, Westminster to Hyder, Cumberland to Beyonde, and we're right this now at process of tying St. Mary's to Pardu. No, not there, Pardu, I guess. So it's the whole state's involved in this project, and each of those cities are different parts of Estonia, so there's a mixture that way. So it's not just at our level tying the country to the state. So that answers some of your questions, which I should have mentioned earlier.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. You know, I want to space special thanks to Bill Davis and to the Secretary of State of Maryland for awarding us the citation for publicizing international issues, what we call bringing the world to Annapolis. I'd like to pay specific tribute to you, our members, our loyal members who are coming month after month and making this club real. So, and I'd like to just say that, you know, for me, you guys are all VIPs, and I don't just mean verified, inoculated personnel. I mean, you're really important people. So give yourself a hand. Come on. So next month on Wednesday, February 2nd, Ambassador Tanjit Singh Sandhu will be reintroducing us to India, the world's largest democracy and a country of tremendous importance in Asia and in the world. But tonight, we are particularly delighted to welcome Estonian Ambassador Christian Priik, who will tell us about his thriving Baltic countries, which has enthusiastically embraced the democracy and the commercial aspects of the West. Ambassador Priik has been ambassador to the U.S. since May 2021. Prior to assuming his current duties, Mr. Priik had numerous positions in the Estonian Ministry of Defense, reaching the level of Principal Secretary. Prior to joining the Ministry of Defense, he had assignments with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs related to NATO and pertaining to its enlargement and its partnership with Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia. Ambassador Priik holds a master's degree from the Strategic Studies program at the U.S. Army College. He's a recipient of numerous awards from his country. He's married to Lise, unfortunately not with us tonight, and they have 2 daughters and a son. So, Mr. Ambassador, you probably noticed that over the past years, we've had almost every new Estonian ambassador here. Now, you might ask, why is that? But I think it's because of your enthusiasm for democracy, which reminds us of our own enthusiasm for democracy. So welcome to the podium, sir.
Thanks a lot. So,
You can, please, you should, yes.
We can see him now.
yeah. I hope it's okay if I remove my mask. Okay. So, I'm really honored and humbled to be here today. As much as I may like working in Washington, D.C., which is probably the most interesting capital to work for any diplomat. I know it very well that in order to really understand this country, understand the people, understand the economy, and also to spread the word about my own country. I have to go outside the DC bubble. I have to meet people who are not working day in and day out in federal government or Congress or think tanks and so on and so forth. And even though Annapolis is only some 50 minutes away from my office, I feel a lot of fresh air, so to say. So again, thank you so much for this invitation. Certainly, it also makes me humble to know that pretty much all of my predecessors have been on this very same podium, literally, and have already told the story of our country. I also know that many of you have actually visited my country. I'm very happy for that, but this also means that I have to make some extra efforts to tell you something that is at least newsworthy to you. In order to make this happen, I'd like to do so that I do have some slides. These are not necessarily important to go through sort of bullet by bullet. But I will tell a few things related to those slides. But then I hope that we will have a really lively questions and answers session where there are no dumb questions, so to say. Actually, I hope that I will have a lot of questions coming from you, and I'd be really happy to answer all of them, or if I don't know the answer, then either let my great colleague Trinu to help me out, or send you the answer later on. Anyway, I think one should never expect that people know the basic things about his or her country. So I think on the next slide, I have many of the same facts that actually have been mentioned also in these fact sheets on your table, but some put in a slightly different context. So Estonia is a Nordic country that lies on the shores of the Baltic Sea in the northeastern part of Europe. I hope you can see this European map and the map of northeastern part of Europe. We are bordering, we have land border with Russia and to the south country of Latvia. But we also have historic intensive relations, very good relations with Finland to our north, and Sweden to our west, as well as with other Baltic Sea countries like Poland, Germany, Denmark, etc., etc. Now, land area-wise, Estonia, at least in the context of Europe, Estonia is not really a tiny or a very, very small country. Land area-wise, Estonia is actually slightly bigger than Switzerland, Netherlands, or Denmark. Of course, they all are quite small countries, but Estonia is actually bigger. However, when it comes to population, then Estonia dwarfs, or these countries actually dwarf Estonia. So Estonian population is just 1.3 million, so just like a decent-sized city here. And when you match the population number and the land area, you get a pretty good understanding that Estonia is actually one of the most sparsely populated countries in Europe. Meaning that particularly in the summer, but not only, you visit so many Western Europeans that have come to Estonia to enjoy something that they have completely lost in their own country. The ability to go to the forest, go to the lakes, feel completely alone or enjoy the nature without anyone else on the horizon. Seeing actually the brown bears, seeing the deer or other animals and so on and so forth. To put in the sort of local context, Estonian territory is approximately 1.5 the size of Maryland, or as much as New Hampshire and Vermont put together. GDP-wise, or economy, the size of economy, we have a comparison with the state of Vermont. So again, not really something incredibly big. But then again, we've been up and coming since the early 1990s, and I will talk about the history a bit longer. Language-wise, and people often ask us, so what's the language there? Well, do you speak Russian? Do you speak Latvian? Do you speak whatever language? No, we do speak Estonian. It's a completely independent, separate language, but linguistically, it's the closest language that we have among the languages that are spoken in nation states. Finnish is the closest. We have the comparison that it's almost as close as, let's say, German and Dutch, maybe Italian or Spanish, or some other comparisons like that. So relatively easy to learn each other's language, but they are not identical still. When it comes to sort of cultural ties and cultural influences, and we can firmly say that the cultural influences, the strongest cultural influences are from Germany and from the Nordic countries. In some aspects, preliminary when it comes to cuisine, also from Russia. So, for example, some of the soups are certainly from Russia, or pies. But as I would like to say, we've only taken over some of the good things. So that's about the sort of cultural and geographical landscape. Now, going to the next slide and to our history. As I sometimes say, it is somewhat complicated, and bear with me. So, whereas the people have lived on this nice lot of land close to 10,000 years, and even though up until the early 13th century, Estonians were really sort of independent nations with some local, regional rulers that traded and sometimes also fought with rulers in the wider region, with Scandinavians, with Central Europeans, so on and so forth. But since the early 13th century, when the Teutonic Knights, or the German Knights, came in as part of the so-called Northern Crusades, Estonians were subject to different foreign rulers up until the early 20th century. So I won't I won't burden you with all these different historic wars and different rulers, but basically the sort of rulers of the country have been the Poles, the Danes, the Swedes, the Russians, the Germans, so on and so forth. So again, it's a bit complicated. But then again, throughout this period, one thing remained constant, that the local landlords were the so-called Baltic Germans, so basically the descendants of the Germans who first invaded our region and our country, who became local, so to say, and who ran the country through their own manors and the different lands that belong to the manors, and who also ran the local government despite the higher rulers. So even though, for example, in the early 18th century, the Russians won the Northern War and pushed the Swedes out of Estonia and gained Estonia as a prize, one of the prizes. The local landlords still saved. The Baltic Germans still remained as the local landlords. And Estonians, unfortunately, throughout this period, with very few exceptions, were considered to be sort of lower class people, mainly lived as peasants and as serfs, and the serfdom was only abolished in the 19th century. Now, fast forward some decades from the abolition of serfdom, and during this period, Estonian sort of cultural revival was a very, very important process. After the World War I, Estonia declared its independence and remained independent up until World War II. Like many other countries who emerged from the empires of different empires after the World War I. Now, we were one of these countries that fell victim to the World War II, and unfortunately we did not regain the independence after the war ended, but one occupation was just replaced by another one, and they, as our sort of counting goes, due to the World War II, in one way or another, either by people deported to Siberia, either by people killed in the Second World War, or people fleeing Estonia to get away from Soviet oppressions. We lost close to 20% of our population. So this certainly is an historic scar in our national sort of identity, and something that has very much guided also our current sort of policies and attitudes. And we did regain the independence in 1991. So last year we celebrated 30 years of being independent again. But as I will explain during one of the next slides, throughout this period of occupations, Estonia was never considered to be sort of wiped out of the world map by the United States. and by most of US allies, because we lost our independence as part of the of illegal deals, illegal machinations between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. So let's go ahead from there. And now I'm trying to focus more on the nowadays. And I do understand that sometimes all this historic thing, particularly when I'm talking to high school students or university students, they feel like it's kind of boring, and we may not need it that much. But I very firmly believe that in order to understand the choices of the present time, we need to also know the historic sort of background. So, if you can just since regaining our independence, Estonia has been, I would say, one of the success stories. And when I say it, this means that there is really some success, because Estonians are quite modest people, so you very seldom get any praise or self-praise out of Estonians. But we've really done well, and I think there are two sort of general principles that I would like to emphasize here. Why we have done well, particularly compared with many of the countries that had the same starting point that we had in 1991. Firstly, when it comes to economy and developing the sort of society, we had a very clear understanding from the get-go that for the reasons of both economic as well as political, we need to be open. We need to trade with other countries. We are too small to try to pretend that the rest of the world does not exist, and too small to try to sort of be self-sufficient or anything close to that. So this has led us to be one of these countries that is constantly ranked in top of different rankings when economic freedom, the ease of doing business, and also the tax competitiveness is concerned. This also has led us to the position where we have, as I've noted there, we have the most unicorns per capita in Europe. I probably have to explain what the unicorns are. The unicorns are the companies that reach $1 billion of market capitalization, of $1 billion of value, and Estonia has been surprisingly successful in creating startup companies that actually do make sense, that actually do bring value to their customers, and that actually do attract investments. I guess many of you know, many of you have used the services of Skype, one of the first companies that made it possible to easily communicate with each other using your computers or smartphones. Skype was invented or developed by the Estonian engineers. Now it's already a story that's behind us by 20 years or so. But what has grown out of Skype and some other stories like this is the mindset and the culture of entrepreneurship that really likes to get things done, likes to look at the existing problems and to try to find new solutions with new technology, so that we can get more value out of what we're doing.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did you say million or billion?
Billion. One with 9 zeros. No. Yeah, it's always confusing. And the words sound incredibly similar, but even in Estonian, even though in Estonian there's different words, people do get confused. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. I think particularly when talking to the American audience, it's important to talk about security and defense. And the other principle, I mentioned the first principle of being an open economy, trading nation, and so on and so forth. But the other principle that actually very well rhymes with it is the understanding that security is indivisible, and the fact that in order for us to feel secure, we have to be we have to also do our part and have to be there when our allies need us. In 1940, when we lost our independence, 1939 and 1940, Estonian leadership back then and the Estonian nation back then had a kind of vision or dream that even though bad things were starting to happen in Europe and elsewhere in the world, that if we don't stick our nose to other people's and other nations' dealings, so to say, we would be saved from any harm. Unfortunately, this turned to be tragically not true. And again, as I pointed out earlier, this historically tragic experience has very much guided our policies now. Meaning that we really think that something that impacts our allies elsewhere, be it the 9/11 here or the terrorists on the streets of Paris or something else, is actually something that influences us as well, and we have to be there when our allies need us in order to make sure that they're there when we need them. So Estonia is the member of NATO and EU since 2004. We are one of these nations that have for years spent on defense at the level or more than NATO agreed level, recommended level of 2% per GDP. We have been, again, since we are a very small nation, we have been among the highest per capita contributors to operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have been on the forefront when it comes to acknowledging and dealing with cyber security issues and cyber defense in NATO. The NATO so-called Cyber Defense Center of Excellence is actually in Estonia and led by an Estonian. When it comes to the cooperation with the US in some sort of niche areas, and we have really excellent and quite spectacular cooperation when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to cyber defense. Again, it's all relative to our size, but particularly in my previous job in the Ministry of Defense, I was often almost surprised to hear all the praise that different American visitors used, or the different praise that they said when it came to cooperation with Estonian agencies. And next, I think that's the last one. Now, a bit more about the ties with US and Maryland. This year, in fact, we're gonna celebrate 100 years of diplomatic relations with the US. 28th of July 1922, the United States recognized Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and established diplomatic relations. And very importantly, between the two world wars, U.S. chose to follow the so-called non-recognition policy, which was a serious frustration to the Soviet Union. The U.S. never recognized Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as part of as legitimate part of the Soviet Union. And throughout this period, U.S. State Department flew the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian flag as flags of independent countries. And we did have our diplomatic representations in the Soviet Union, not in the Soviet Union, but in the United States throughout this time. There is a strong Estonian community in the US. I'm very glad to have several members of this community also in this room. Number-wise, impossible to really tell, but we think that there are around 25,000 people with Estonian roots in the US, and approximately 10,000 of those who strongly identify themselves as Estonians, but they are mostly spread out across the country. But as Milt said before, Maryland has one of the highest percentage of Estonians actually living in Maryland. Now, back in Estonia, there has always been very strong sort of transatlantic spirit, very strong affinity to the United States. I remember when I was a small kid, and when we had a very unique opportunity to actually watch Finnish television, because we were so close to the coast of Finland. Then my parents told me, pointing at the screen where there was President Reagan speaking, that you know, this is one tough guy, and these people have not forgotten about us. So this sense of appreciation and gratitude has always been among Estonian people, and understanding that Americans as freedom-loving people are there also when their allies actually are in trouble, or that Americans as freedom-loving people are there if there is something that we can do together in the rest of the world to help other people. This is very strongly there. I already mentioned the cooperation in the military sphere, but again, this is really remarkable. I've been surprised to hear how often I meet U.S. military personnel and hear of their experience from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from some other operational areas that they have worked together with Estonians. And now ties with Maryland go back, as Milt explained, to the early 1990s, when NATO created the Partnership for Peace format to sort of engage the countries that were formerly behind the Iron Curtain. And then US had a sort of separate or sub-program, state partnership program, So in 1993, Estonia and Maryland National Guard was partnered. This military part of this program has been really successful, so successful that Maryland has been given the opportunity to actually work also with Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, and actually there have been projects where Maryland, Bosnia and Estonia work together. But what's very remarkable is the fact that this military program has sort of spun off the civilian part of it, that Milt also generously mentioned. So I truly feel that there is a sense of understanding and something that connects our people, whether it's the love of sea, like Chesapeake Bay and the Baltic Sea in Estonia, whether it's biotech, whether it's about IT services or something else. It's always there is always some topic that we actually share. And since I do think that it's better to go to the questions and answers, I will leave the last slide, which is next, on the screen, but I will not go into that. I will just leave you some facts that people quite often ask about, so to say, e-Estonia, or the way we've decided that in order to really keep up with the rest of the world, we need to enthusiastically embrace the new technologies in order to create the governance and public services that our people can rely on when communicating with the government or doing business between each other. We believe that this has created some unique opportunities for our countries, but I can describe these in the Q&A section if necessary.
Thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job, Ambassador, of